Now, if you remember back at the beginning of Daniel chapter 9, he was in the Word, as we all need to be in the Word. And he was reading in the book of Jeremiah, how we all need to be studying the prophets. And he came across a verse there that said, in 70 years, that the children of Israel would return back to the land after having been taken captive. Now, at this point, Daniel was a part of the first deportation, which means it had been 67 years at the time he is reading this. So he realizes that in 3 more years, if indeed God was calculating from the first deportation, that in 3 more years it would be 70 years. And so Daniel sets his face to begin to seek the Lord on this issue. And thus we had a couple Bible studies on prayer. Now, Daniel was a man of the Word. And as we read the Word, we discover that God gives us great and precious promises. But we have to claim them. We have to, by faith, grab a hold of them as our own. We see, for example, that study in Judges chapter 1 where the children of Israel come in and they're having a hard time with the Jebusites and the Amorites and the Canaanites. They were determined to stay there, and they had chariots and there was lots of people. But yet, if you go back, God had given them precious promises for that very situation. In the book of Exodus and in Deuteronomy and in Joshua, he had specifically said, when you come against the Amorites, when you come against the Jebusites, when you come against the Canaanites, they're going to have chariots. Don't be concerned. I, the Lord, by myself, will overthrow them for you. But yet, they didn't end up getting overthrown. They ended up remaining in the land, and that became a snare to them. And thus you have the book of Judges. They didn't claim those promises. God had given them the promises, but they didn't claim them, and thus that promise was not availed for them at that time. Later on they claimed them, and they indeed were kicked out, but at that time they didn't make those promises their own. So Daniel knows of this. But also, we have the story in Genesis chapter 15, where God said to Abraham, your descendants, they're going to be multitude in number, but they're also going to be slaves in a foreign land for 4 generations, referring to 400 years. But as it turned out, it ended up being 430 years. Why? Because 10 years before the 400-year mark, God begins to prepare Moses, but he's this prideful, independent person, and God has to take him out to the desert to make him the most humblest person on the earth as he's broken there before the Lord. And so he ends up being 430 years before Moses comes back. So it was 4 generations plus an extra 30 years. And so Daniel realizes, yeah, it could be 70 years, that's the minimum, but it could end up being 80 or 90 or 100 years. And I want them to go back to the land as soon as possible. And so 3 years ahead of the mark, he begins pressing in upon the Lord concerning this issue, as we all should do, seeking the face of God. And so, again, God could say, well, 70 years from the second or third, the final deportation when Israel was destroyed, that was several years later. It could end up going on. We see within this the nature of God and how God works. I think of that story in 1 Samuel 23 when David, when he was on the run from Saul, he comes down to the city of Keilah with his mighty men and delivers them from the Philistines. And there he's living there thinking, wow, I have a home now. But yet he hears that Saul is getting an army together to come down to fight, have a campaign against the city of Keilah. And David doesn't assume anything. He presses in upon the Lord and seeks the Lord, saying, is Saul coming here? And even though I delivered the people from the Philistines, will they hand me over to Saul if he comes down? And the Lord said yes to both. Saul's coming down, and yes, these people are going to hand you over, and they're going to be killed. So David, with his mighty men, left the city of Keilah, and it said that thus Saul halted his expedition. Thus he never came to Keilah. Thus the people never handed him over. Thus David didn't die at that time. And so we see there within the whole concept of God and his working that our decisions make a part in our future. And as well, our prayers make a big difference. concerning the future. And so Daniel knows that God is true to his word, but he also knows that there's some time in there where the children of Israel, would be 70, but it could be more. And so 67 years into it, he begins to seek the Lord concerning this matter. And remember there, we saw last week in verse 21, that Gabriel, he looked like a man. Don't get confused. He was an angel, but that's the way he appeared. As we study through the Bible, angels often look like men or young men. Matter of fact, Hebrews says, be careful entertaining strangers. You may entertain an angel unaware, because they so much look like a man. But there it says that he came and flew swiftly to them. By the way, this is the only reference in the Bible of angels flying. So, we always picture angels flying, and of course, I don't picture them with wings like a butterfly. I picture them more like a rocket, flying. But anyway, however you picture it. And it says he got there swiftly. See, that's rocket power right there. And anyway, you can differ with me on that point. And it says he got there about the time of the evening offering. Of course, if they were back in Jerusalem, which they weren't, they were in Babylon, Daniel here negotiating his life around the worship of God, even though he was in a pagan culture, anything but worshiping the true and living God. The evening sacrifice could be given anywhere between 3 p.m. and twilight. So that gives you the time. And Gabriel came and he said to Daniel, that I'm going to give you skill to understand these things. And in verse 23, at the beginning of your supplications, the command went out, and I have come to tell you, for you are greatly beloved. The same word of Jesus Christ. This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. And the Father speaks that of Daniel. You are beloved of the Father. Therefore, consider the matter, calculate it out, and understand the vision. Now, let's stop right here just a moment and think about this. Daniel is thinking about 70. 70 years they're in captivity. 70 years they go back to the promised land. Why 70 years? Because we know that from Joshua to the Babylonian deportation, where the Jews were scattered throughout the world, was 490 years. God had commanded them every 7th year to give that up as a rest unto the Lord. The land was God's. He's letting them live there, but every 7th year was God's. That was their offering. That was their tithe. They were to give that back to God. Every 7th year was His. Well, in that 490 years, not one time did they give that every 7th year. So if you divide 7 into 490, you get the 70 years. And this is what God said. You didn't give me the land that I could bless you and you could have a year's vacation. I just bless you in it. You didn't have that faith. So now I'm going to take it from you. That 70 years was mine. Whether you gave it to me and were blessed, or whether I take it from you and you're cursed, either way, it's mine. So since you wouldn't give me the every 7th year, I'm just going to take them all at once. 70 years, they're mine. You're out of the land. The land's going to have its rest. And that's indeed exactly what happened. And so Daniel's thinking 7 groups of 7 into 490 to get the 70. Now that's important. And we're talking here about years. 490 years, 70 years. Now why is that important? Because notice in verse 24. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city. Now remember, God knows the beginning and God knows the end. God can look at a hill and tell you every person that will ever walk on that hill, every battle ever fought there, everything ever built there, from all generations. God can look at a shoreline and tell you every ship that'll come in that way, everybody that'll be at that beach. So God can look at things and He can say, oh, see this king is going to be similar to that king 1,000 years later. And God can give those kind of associations. I like, that game Match 'em. You ever done that with cards? You lay them out and you have them all face down and you pull up an 8, and then you pull up a 5, and then you put them both down, and then you try to find, oh, here's an 8. You met the 8, you get the 8, and you see how many cards you can get. You guys ever played that game? Yeah, okay. Well, God's sort of doing that with numbers. 70, 7, 490, and God's sort of playing Match 'em here, if you would. And he's saying, yep, there was 490 years they were in the land till they were kicked out. 70 years they'd be out of the land. So 490 years, 70 years, let's think in those terms. So really what you have here in verse 24 is the word 70, and then there's the translation weeks here. Now, this is probably a poor translation to translate it weeks. In the Old Testament, they didn't do it as much as they did in the New Testament. But there are times when you are translating scriptures that you do not have an equivalent word. This culture, they have a specific word for something, and now you come to whatever language, in our case, English, let's say. And the Hebrew culture has a word that there's no word like it in the English. Now, in the New Testament, they did a very smart thing. They didn't try to translate it. What they did is what's called transliteration. When you can't translate something, you should give a transliteration, which means we're going to take that exact Hebrew word or Greek word, and we're just going to find an association. So, you know, in the Greek, you have the daleth, so that looks sort of like a D in the English, so I'm just going to make it a D. You got something that, you know, looks like an E, so I'm going to make it an E. It looks something an L, I'm making it. So you just sort of take the letters out of the Greek or out of the Hebrew, and the best guess you can, you put it into the English, and there you have a word. Now, in your New Testament, you have a lot of words that are not English words. They're actually Greek words, and they're transliterated. In other words, the word apostle, that's a Greek word that was transliterated into the English, or the word disciple, or the word Christ, or the word Jesus. All of these words are transliterated into the English because there's really not an equivalent, or if they did try to give the equivalent, it would take away from the translation. Do you understand that? So here, this word for weeks is really means group of 7. We don't have anything like that. As a matter of fact, in our culture, we don't really go by sevens. We go by dozens, don't we? We say, oh, that's about a dozen, a half a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen. We go by groups of 12. Some culture goes by groups of 10. Oh, it's about 10. Well, the Jewish culture, they go by groups of 7. And I think that was wise, because as you look at nature, things are sort of grouped in 7. For example, if you know anything about music, you can run up the scale, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but then after you get those 7 notes, what happens on the 8th note? It goes back to A, doesn't it? It goes back to another group of 7. That's why 7 in the Hebrew is the number for completion. And 8 is the number for new beginnings. And so God here is grouping things in groups of 7. Now, as you study through the Old Testament, you'll find this word several times. Probably the best example of it would be found in Genesis, there on that story concerning Jacob, in Genesis 29. And you can study that out and look there. But when he's talking about Jacob, especially there in verse 27, he talks about that word. He uses it twice, and it says fulfill her week, and then it says he worked another 7 years. So when you have this word in the Hebrew, it can mean 7 days, 7 months, 7 years, whatever group of 7 you want. And so here when it says 70, then it says with that 70, a group of 7. So is it a group of 70 group of 7 weeks, 70 group of 7 months, group of 77 years? What do? Well, we go back, and as they do in the Hebrew, they look at the context. Now, as we read Daniel chapter 9, Daniel is thinking about 70 what? Years. And it's 70 years because they were 490 years in the land. So the group of 7 here would be associating with years. So when you look at 70 weeks, or 7 and a group of 7, you're looking at 70 times 7. Now, I need to stop here and qualify something. The Bible says to love God with all your heart, right? But he also says love God with all your what? Your mind. And this is one of those days. So if you're new here today, or this is your third week here, we don't always have messages like this. You go, wow, at Calvary, their messages are rather mathematical. Well, it's not like that every week. But this week, pull out your calculator, okay? Because this week it is. This is one of those unusual passages of the Bible in which God is speaking through numbers. And so pull out your calculator, get your pen and pencil out, get ready to write down some names and some dates and some numbers. You're going to want to know them to refer back. Why? Because these next 4 verses, Daniel chapter 9, verse 24 to 27, many refer to as the backbone of Bible prophecy, or the foundation stones of Bible prophecy. In other words, if you don't understand these next 4 verses, you will not understand the book of Ezekiel, you will not understand the book of Revelation, and you will not understand the teachings of Jesus concerning the end times. As a matter of fact, in Matthew 24, Jesus says, let the reader understand, refer to Daniel chapter 9, verse 27 is the verse that Jesus tells us to go back and study out. So we're commanded by Jesus to study these verses, specifically to understand his teaching. Jesus simply says, an abomination and desolation will take place. Let the reader understand. Let him read the book of Daniel. Jesus said that. And he was referring to these very verses right here. So, it's not going to come easy. So if you don't kick your mind out of neutral into first gear here, and you don't set up and get ready to listen, you're going to walk out of here going, what in the world did he just say? And I can't believe it's of God if it's that difficult to understand. Well, this is difficult to understand, and I know many of you have just started in Christianity, and you're, wanting to do addition. Well, hey, today we're taking you from addition into trigonometry. And I understand that a big percentage of this you won't get, but much of this you will. And to be honest with you, as difficult as this is in some ways to understand, people have come from atheists to become believers through these next 4 verses. As a matter of fact, the pastor of Calvary Chapel in Cheyenne, Wyoming, while being taught these 4 verses by Pastor Chuck Smith in Costa Mesa, he went from being a cynical atheist to a believer because of these 4 verses. They're very important. So hang in there with me, and I promise you that every message will not be like this, but today is an unusual passage, and so you have to be geared up and ready to go. You ready? Oh boy, that was weak. Let's try it again here. Let's go. Are you ready? Yeah, okay. Now we're ready. Okay. This is exciting stuff. 70 groups of 7. So 70 times 7 is what? Boy, I don't know what you said. But you should have said 490, and we're talking about groups of years. So notice here, he says 70 weeks or 490 years are determined for your people. Who is Daniel's people? The Jews, and for your holy city, which is what? So God said, look back in the past, from Joshua till Jerusalem is no more, was a group of 490 years. But I'm telling you, Daniel, not just about your current situation of the children of Israel going back to the land, but I'm telling you, in the future, there's only another 490 years upon this planet that God's going to deal with Israel as a nation. And then it's done with. So there's another 490 years God's going to deal with the children of Israel. Now, when does this stop? Or when does this start? At Daniel's conversation? No. Notice what he says here. 6 things. First of all, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Now, the first 3 of these 6 things in verse 24 were accomplished in Jesus' first coming. Notice, he finished the transgression. How did he do that? Jesus, upon the cross, took the sin of the entire world upon him. Not only the past sins, not only the present sins, but he reached into the future and took every sin and placed it upon himself on the cross. Every sin that will ever be committed on this planet was dealt with through the body of Jesus Christ, being pierced, being beaten, being crucified, his blood was shed. He dealt with every transgression that will ever be committed upon this planet through the cross of Christ. And thus he made an end of sins. The Bible says, he who knew no sin became sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of Christ. And then to make reconciliation for iniquity, he indeed was our substitute lamb. John the Baptist said, behold, the Lamb of God, who what? Takes away the sin of the world. And indeed, Jesus in his first coming accomplished these first three. Now in his second coming, he's going to accomplish the second three. To bring in an everlasting righteousness, the millennial 1,000-year reign, to seal up the vision of prophecy, to fulfill all the prophecies. They'll be fulfilled by the end of the tribulation period. And then to anoint the most holy. Now in the grammar here, it's clearly not referring to a person, but a place. So again, the translation on this should be to the most holy place, not a person. The most holy thing, most holy place. This is referring to Jerusalem. And there he's going to redo the earth in the millennial reign, and then he's going to make a new Jerusalem, which he himself will rule and reign from for that 1,000 years. So the second of these three are going to be accomplished in the second coming of Christ. Now in verse 25, know therefore and understand. Do you know why the Bible says to know? Because you're supposed to know this. So if you don't know this, you better pay attention. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until the Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks, or 7 times 7 years, and 62 weeks, 62 times 7 years. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublesome times. So here he tells us when the clock is going to start. The clock is going to start when it says to rebuild Jerusalem. Now there's 4 different times that this command was given to go back to Jerusalem, to build the temple. But there's only one command when it's actually to rebuild Jerusalem and the courtyard and the wall. And indeed it was in troublesome times as you read the book of Nehemiah. So to envelop all of verse 25, there was only one command that enveloped the city, the walls, the courtyard, the whole 9 yards. And that is in Nehemiah chapter 2. And in Nehemiah chapter 2, Artaxerxes gave a decree. Now you say, this is so important, we should have a date. Indeed, God has preserved a date. And archaeologically, we have discovered that date. And it is our March 14th, 445 BC. Make a note of that. Write it down if you don't know this. On March 14th, 445 BC, Artaxerxes gave a decree to rebuild not only the temple or Jerusalem, but the entire thing. And indeed it was done. And if you read the book of Nehemiah, it was in very troublesome times. And I'm not going to go into that today. And so he said, at that point, start the clock. Now he gives first a 7 times 7, 49 years. Now if you look in the book of Ezra and read the book of Nehemiah, they were back in the country, but they really weren't a country. In the book of Ezra, they're a bunch of scattered farmers, and even though the temple is finally built, they can't worship there because there's so much oppression. And then after Nehemiah, they get the walls built, they start forming the country again, and within 49 years, they're back on their feet, once again, the Jews as a nation. So he first says, mark 7 times 7, a 49-year period. Then after that, right after that, add another 62 times 7. 62 times 7 is what? 434 years. Until, notice there, the Messiah, the Prince. So 49 plus 434, or 7 plus 62 weeks, 79 weeks, comes out to 483 years. So of the 490 years that God's going to deal with the Jews as a nation, after 483 years, the Messiah, the Prince, is going to come. Now, You have a bit of a problem here if you just try to tag on to March 14th, 445 BC, 483 years to see when the Messiah would come. You have a little bit of a hard time. Because they went, as we have, from a Babylonian calendar unto the Julian calendar. Now in our Julian calendar, we have how many days in a year? 365 and a quarter years. So what we say is every 4 years we say we have a leap year. In other words, our calendar's messed up, so we have to add an extra day, and to get back on track, okay, that's what we have to do every 4 years. Well, what the Babylonians did is they had their leap time, but it was a whole month. So every year they just tack on an extra month, and they would get back on track. So we have to go back and say, to try to negotiate for our date, to find our date, we've got to go back and reuse the Babylonian calendar, but instead of trying to figure out by years, let's just go to days. So if you go with the 483 years times the Babylonian calendar of a 360-day year and multiply that out, quickly do it, carry the 1 to the 2, 173,880 days. So you guys all get that? Yeah, I cheated. It's in my notes. But anyway, it's 173,880 days. So now we can go back in history and say, March, what? 14th, what year? 445 BC, and add 173,880 days. Where does that fall in history? And is there any unique thing that happens on that day? Well, it happens to fall on April 6th, 32 AD. Is there anything significant that's recorded in history on that day? There absolutely is. And it's found in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19. Would you guys turn over there? To the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19. We find there what we call now the triumphal entry. And in verse 29, it says there in Luke chapter 19, verse 29, and it came to pass when he, Jesus, drew near to Bethphage and Bethany. This is just right on the hill east of Jerusalem. And at the mountain called Olivet, that he sent 2 of his disciples. And he said to them, go into the village opposite you, where as you enter you will find a colt tied on which no one has ever sat. Loose it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, why are you loosing it? Thus you shall say to him, because the Lord has need of it. I tried this the other day with this guy's Ferrari, and he told me, get out and don't try it again. So you got to really make sure this is the Lord. But anyway, so in verse 32, to those who were sent went their way and found it just as he said to them. But as they were loosing the colt, the owner of it said to them, why are you loosing the colt? And they said, the Lord has need of him. Then they brought him to Jesus, and they threw their clothes on the colt, and they set Jesus on him. And as he went, many spread their clothes on the road. Then as he was drawing near the descent of the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of the disciples began to rejoice and to praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works that they had seen, saying, and now they sing a psalm out of Psalms 118, verse 26, that is a psalm reserved only for the Messiah. And they begin to sing, blessed is the what? King, who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest. And some of the Pharisees called him from the crowd, teacher, rebuke your disciples. But he answered and said to them, I tell you that if these should keep silent, the stones would immediately cry out. And in verse 41, now as he drew near, he saw the city, and he wept over it, saying, if you had known, even you, especially what? In this, what? Your day. This is your day. the things that make for your peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment around you, surround you, close you in on every side, and level you and your children within you to the ground. And they will not leave in you one stone upon another, because what? You did not know the time of your visitation. Jesus there, out of the prophecy of Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9, it says, Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and having salvation, lowly, riding on a donkey. And it says there on the colt that he would come, just as the Bible prophesied. Now, in those days when a king had won in battle, he would come and they would have sort of a ticker tape parade for him. And they would put him upon a colt that had never been ridden on before. And there the people would put palm branches and garments, and they would begin to praise him for the victory. And Zechariah 9:9 says that indeed the Messiah will come as the king, and they will proclaim him as the king. Speaking of that day. And Jesus, as he's writing in, the Pharisees say, hey, stop these people from this blasphemy that's reserved only for the Messiah. And Jesus said, if these people were to stop, the rocks would begin crying out. You would have a radical earthquake happening here. And then he comes and he weeps as he looks from Mount of Olivet over Israel. Oh, it's beautiful, beautiful sight as you look over the city of Jerusalem. When I take our trips to Jerusalem or to Israel, we first spend time down in Galilee studying the ministry of Jesus. But then as we're now going to come and spend some time in Jerusalem, I try to plan it where we're down in the Dead Sea area, but then we come up the old Roman road. And boy, you're in prayer on that, I'll tell you. But you finally come up the old Roman road, and I have prepared a whole bunch of songs, Jewish songs, of the various songs of ascent. And we have them playing, and we're singing along, and we're coming up. And I try to plan it so the first time you ever look upon Jerusalem is just as the sun is setting, and you're coming up right here where Jesus is on the Mount of Olives looking out over Jerusalem. It's every time something to make you weep as you look at that city. But here Jesus goes back up and he begins to weep. And he says, I guarantee you now that this place is going to be leveled. Devastation is going to be extraordinary because you didn't know the time of your visitation. The Lord here holds them accountable for not having known Daniel chapter 9. As we get to Hosea, he said the people were destroyed because they lacked knowledge. We have within our own government, which is based upon the Scriptures, ignorance of the law is what? It's no excuse. You can't say, I'm sorry, I didn't see the sign was 25 miles an hour through here, so I'm innocent. They're still going to get the ticket. Whether you knew it had gone from 40 miles an hour to 25 miles or not, it doesn't matter. You are still guilty. In the same way, the Bible tells us that no man will have an excuse before God. He won't allow it because of creation itself and because of the specific Word of God. No man's going to stand before God saying, hey, I just didn't know. You can't hold me guilty. It's not going to happen. And here Jesus said, you should have studied the Scriptures on prophecy, and you should have known. You should have calculated it out. You should have figured it out. You should have known what today is. That today is a unique day in the history of this planet. Now, as you go back and look at Jesus' ministry, he never went into cities and just allowed them to praise and worship him. Quite the opposite. He kept shutting it down. When he would heal a blind man, go, don't tell him it was me. He heals a leopard, go show yourself to the priest, as the Bible says, but don't tell him it was me. He constantly said, don't do it. His mother said, hey, we need some more wine here. He said, hey, my time is not yet. He kept saying that. My time is not yet. My time is not yet. But on this day, it's completely unique. If you look through Jesus' ministry, he didn't do a lot of planning. He didn't do a lot of organizing. Don't worry about it if we don't have food. It'll be there when we need it. Don't worry about bringing an extra garment or money bag. It'll take care of itself. You just preach the gospel. But all of a sudden now, it's almost uncharacteristic. Here now, the Lord is radically planning things. Hey, I've got this colt set apart. It's almost as if it had been there before time began. I know exactly where this colt is, even though he hadn't been there. I know the owner of the colt, and here's what you're to do. Get this colt. It's never been ridden on before. It's been protected. It's a brand new colt. He has it all laid out. It's all organized. And now, quite the opposite, does he not suppress the people from worshiping him? He encourages it, and he receives it. Because this is the time. This is the day that the Lord has made. This particular day God had made from all of time. And he said, because you didn't know the time of the visitation, you're cursed. Now, why is that so significant? You say, Bryan, that's all a bunch of history. Because the Lord has the same exact type of speech concerning his second coming. As you study Jesus and what he says, you should know. A matter of fact, in 1 Thessalonians 5, Paul says, you are not ignorant of the second coming of Christ. You're not ignorant concerning the times and the seasons. You very well know, he said to the Thessalonian church. Jesus said, when these things start taking place, when you see the fig tree, when it begins to bear its leaves, you know the figs are right behind it. In the same way, you know, when you start seeing these things, you know that the coming of the Lord is near. Now he says to Daniel, concerning the future, it's about your people and about the city Jerusalem. Now this is important because you got to realize before 1948, for almost 2,000 years, Israel was not a nation. They were scattered to the four corners of the world. And before 1948, the idea of Israel becoming a nation again was preposterous. They've been out of their land for almost 2,000 years, and imagine these Jews getting along and coming back into a land and making a country again. Impossible. And so what happened is before 1948, a lot of people studying end-time scriptures, every time you study end times, no matter what the passage is, whether it's Ezekiel or Jesus teaching in the Gospels or Revelation, every time you can't have end times without Israel being a nation and without the city of Jerusalem being their capital. It doesn't work. And thus you have all kinds of crazy teachings before 1948 saying that the Jews are the church, and so the church is really there, and you know, it's not Jerusalem, but it's heaven, and all of these different various teachings. So we are in great advantage being after 1948. 1948, Israel became a nation. 1967, they took Jerusalem once again as their capital. All of these things are key leaves on the tree, if you would, saying that the time of the coming of the Lord is very, very near. Jesus said there's going to be wars, there's going to be rumors of wars. All these things are going to be taking place. The days are going to be as Sodom and Gomorrah. Boy, it is, worldwide. The days are going to be as Noah, given and taken in marriage. Indeed they are. And so we see the days in which we live in, and boy, they're exactly as the Lord described the fig tree would be before it begins to produce figs, saying the coming of the Lord is near. And what does he say? He says, when you see this, watch yourself. The days are going to be a perilous time. They're going to be an evil time. Jude says, keep yourself in the love of God. There's going to be carousing and drunkenness. The cares of this life are going to be overwhelming. And you yourselves, you need to pray that you will be found worthy on that day. And whoever is not worthy on that day, it says it's going to become a snare to the whole planet and everybody left on this planet. So the Lord gives some pretty heavy warnings, not just in the Gospels, but also in the book of Revelation to the churches to make sure you're ready when you see the time of the coming of the Lord is very, very near. So here we see that he says you can know the time of the coming of the Lord, 173,880 days, or out of the 490 years, 843 of them. Now, what do we have here? We have 7 years left, or a week left, if you use that Hebrew word. Another group, we have one more group of 7 years. Well, let's read on that, and back in Daniel here, there in verse 26. So now he sort of goes back and he says there in Daniel chapter 9, verse 26, now after the 62 weeks, the ones he talked about back in verse 25, the Messiah shall be cut off. Now I'm not going to go into it today, but that's a very clear term for being executed throughout the Old Testament. When somebody broke the law, they were to be executed. The term would be cut off. So he would be cut off. He would be executed, but not for himself. So sure enough, right after the April 6th date, right after the 483 years, within a few days following, Jesus Christ would be taken to this ludicrous mock trial. From there, he would be taken and crucified between two thieves. And on the third day, he would rise again. It wasn't for himself. It was for you and me. That he would take our sins upon himself and that he would die in our place. And after he was cut off, not for himself, but for us, then we see, and the people of the prince who is to come. Now, all of a sudden, right here in verse 26, we have this gigantic gap of time. But you say, Bryan, it doesn't look like there's a gap of time. Well, as you read on, you're going to see him talking about the tribulation period very clearly. But you got to understand, in Hebrew writing, this is a very common practice. There's literally dozens of examples I could show you, but I'm just going to show you a couple examples on this. Turn over to Isaiah chapter 9 real quickly here. Isaiah chapter 9, starting there in verse 6. A passage that's very familiar to us. It says, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. Do you guys know who that's talking about? Yeah, Jesus. And then notice, not even a breath, not even a completion of the sentence, but in the middle of the sentence of verse 6, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and it continues, and the government will be upon his shoulder. His name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And of the increase of his government peace there will be no end upon the throne of David over his kingdom, to order and establish it with judgment and justice from this time forward, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. So we know there in the middle of verse 6, right after unto us a son is given, the government resting upon his shoulder is not until the millennial reign. So from the birth of Christ to the rest of verse 6 and verse 7 is thousands of years gap. Look over to Luke chapter 1, if you would, real quick. This is a very common thing. I'm going to show you one in the Old Testament and one in the New Testament so you can understand this principle of interpreting Scripture. In Luke chapter 1, verse 31, it says, and behold, this is Gabriel talking to Mary, and behold, you will conceive in your womb and bring forth a son, and shall call his name Jesus. Now verse 32, he will be great, he will be called the Son of the Highest, and the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever. In his kingdom there will be no end. It almost sounds like he's going to be born, and the moment he's born, he's going to be king on the throne of David forever. But in reality, we know, don't we? Between verse 31 and 32, there would again be a gap of thousands of years before Christ would rule and reign upon this earth in the millennial reign. So it's not uncommon within the Bible to have, within even the same sentence or within a couple of verses, to have a giant gap of time. Even though both of those things are true, they're not true at the same time. They're true thousands of years apart. So with that in mind, go back now to Daniel chapter 9. So we see there in verse 26 that the Messiah, the Prince, would be cut off, but not for himself. And now here's the next thought, referring to a different prince. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end of it shall be with a flood, till the end of the war desolations are determined. Then he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. There it is, for one more group of sevens. But in the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to the sacrifice and the offerings, and on the wing of the abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. Remember, Jesus refers to this. abomination of desolation. Let the reader understand. He refers back to this passage in Daniel. So there in verse 26, the people of the prince. This here is referring to the Antichrist. Now, if you remember in chapter 7 and chapter 8 of Daniel, there's going to be a rebirth of that Roman Empire, which is the area of Europe today. And in that rebirth of that Roman Empire, today we already see it in its rebirth in the European Union. They already have the euro coin. The Antichrist is going to raise up out of that revived Roman Empire, out of that European Union that's already established. It's going to end up being 10 nations. Right now it's 15 nations, but eventually it's going to get reduced down to 10 nations. And he's going to raise up out of there, and he's going to be like the prince of the world. This word prince, remember in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 2, Satan is referred to as the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now works in the sons of disobedience. Satan's also called the god of this world. He's also called the angel of light. He's called a lot of different things in a sarcastic way. So who are the people of the prince? The Romans. So in the very first here, in verse 26, he's talking about the people, the Roman Empire, and he's referring to the destruction of 70 AD that happened by Titus Vespasian, when he came to Jerusalem and he completely destroyed it. And from that point, from 70 AD until 1948, the Jews have been scattered throughout the world. And he says there it's going to be a flood. And of course you can read about the destruction of that 70 AD destruction in the writings of Josephus, the historian. And it was absolutely horrendous, the destruction. There's nothing like it in history, the hideous picture of the destruction by the Romans upon Israel in that time. But then it says in verse 27, skipping again ahead now, not to the actual historical Roman Empire, but now the rebirth of the Roman Empire, he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, 7 years. So what we have here is the first 483 years are until the Messiah the Prince is cut off. And at that point, when the Messiah the Prince is cut off, it's like a parenthesis of time. That 490-year period sort of goes on hold. After the Messiah the Prince is cut off, not for himself, the 490 years of God dealing with Israel gets put on hold. And from Christ, since he died upon the cross, until the present, we discover in Romans chapter 11, verse 25, as well as in Luke chapter 21, it tells us that there is the time of the Gentiles. That right now we are in a time that the Gentiles of the world can have Jesus as their Messiah. That we can be adopted into the household of Israel, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob be our fathers. So we are in a parenthesis of time right now where God is not directly dealing with Israel as a nation. He's dealing with anyone who will call upon the name of the Lord, they can be saved. But it says that time is going to be fulfilled, that time is going to end. I believe that period of time, known as the time of the Gentiles, which we are presently in, is going to end with the rapture of the church. And at the rapture of the church, the clock concerning God dealing with Israel starts again. And now, the 483 years, there's one more group of sevens. That last 7 years, we discover, as we read on in Ezekiel and Jeremiah and the book of Revelation, is known as the Great Tribulation period. And what he does in that 7 years, he brings about a false peace. You can read about it in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. He brings this delusion upon the whole world, and he brings this peace. It's not really a peace. Now, we really see things interesting, don't we, right now? Because you have right now stirred up this whole Muslim thing throughout the world, and this whole Jewish thing, and they keep saying in the news, we wouldn't be against America if they weren't for Israel. Stop being for Israel, and we're cool. We'll leave America alone. Have you heard that? Isn't that just amazing to you? I'm proud every time I hear that. Going, all right, us and Israel, side by side. Boy, you can't get in a better political situation than that concerning the Lord, because whoever blesses God's people will be blessed. Whoever curses God's people will be cursed. That promise to Abraham stands to this day out of Genesis chapter 12. But at that point, I believe what's going to happen, it's quite interesting, because we know that he's going to make a covenant with Israel. What's that going to be? We know it's going to be to help rebuild the temple. Now, if you know anything about the political situation in Israel today, the last thing they want is the temple rebuilt. The people in power in the nation of the Jews today are not a religious people. Matter of fact, you may not have known this, but the highest population of atheists among any ethnic group is the Jews. As an ethnic group, they have more atheists than any other ethnic group. They basically say, if there really is a God, he never would have allowed the Holocaust to happen. And so what you have in power today in Israel is this group of people, they sort of go to the synagogue and stuff, but to them it's just a big joke. It doesn't have any real significance. But you have a whole nother party, the Likud party. And these guys are radical religious zealots. And they have a lot of power, and their power is constantly gaining. And so you have this one group of Jews, and they're trying to always appease these religious fanatics in Israel. And when they don't appease them, they call for a vote of confidence, which means we don't believe the president right now has enough power to run this country, and they just simply vote him out, and they have a new election. Vote of confidence. Yep, he doesn't have enough power. They vote for another president. Well, I believe what's going to happen is we're going to start seeing in the European common market, right now we see some things happening. It's going to go from 15 nations down to 10. From there, we're going to start seeing a guy raising up, and it's very possible we'll see that before the rapture of the church. But his first thing, I believe this religious party, this religious group is going to end up dominating and taking over Israel. But right now, the Jews, they don't want a temple. They don't want a priesthood. They know these fanatics will start killing animals. And they're a bunch of liberals for the most part, politically, the Jews are. As a matter of fact, I mean, here they are, the Jews right now, in this horrible, cataclysmic time in their country. But yet, just a few months ago, they had one of the biggest gay pride parades anywhere in the world. They're in Tel Aviv. They're incredibly liberal. And so they don't want to see these priests going up there killing these goats and sheep and whatever. They don't want that. That's just a gross, ancient religious thing to them. But somewhere it's going to change. And I think in the very near future. The Antichrist is going to say, okay, guys, I can make peace in the world between the Muslims and the Jews. Here's how I can do it. If you Jews, this is all speculation now, okay? But if you Jews, and again now I'm estimating that the religious party is ruling, if you're willing to give up Jerusalem and give up the West Bank and give up all these other areas, we will let you build a temple on the Temple Mount area. Now if you read in Ezekiel chapter 40, verse 42, actually chapters 42, 42, but also in specific Ezekiel chapter 40, verse 42, and then the beginning of Revelations 11, Ezekiel's told to measure the temple, and also John is told to measure the temple, and they're told don't bother with the area of the court of the Gentiles because it's profane. So if you go to the Temple Mount area now, you will see what's called the Dome of the Mosque. It's this giant dome building. The Muslims believe they built it right where the temple once was, and they made up this story that, I won't even get into it. But interesting enough, do you know what's written on the side of the Dome of the Mosque? God has never begotten, nor does he beget. It's a slam against John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Wouldn't you think that in Israel, that if the Muslims were going to put somebody down, wouldn't it be the Jews? Wouldn't they put some kind of, Allah is king and God and, down with the Jews' God or something? Wouldn't you think they would have something like that? But these giant letters are trying to put down Christianity. And I believe the Antichrist is going to be able to twist the focus, not a Muslim or a Jewish thing, but they're going to be able to turn the focus to target Christians. Now you got to remember, in Romans chapter 11, it says there that the Jews are the enemies to the church to this day. The Jews hate Jesus. They hate it when somebody says he's the Messiah. I had a Jewish tour guide second to the last time I went, and our missionary to Hungary, his dad is a Jew, but his mom's not. And so he was asking him, saying, now I heard that your mom had to be a Jew to be considered a Jew in Israel. And he said, oh yeah, the woman has to be a Jew. And so we were asking him, going, but hold it. Wasn't King David's grandmother a Gentile? Wasn't she the Ruth the Moabitess? So therefore David is not a Jew. You know, he exploded. I mean, he turned around and began to scream at us. And he said, it's this simple. If you are a Christian, you should never be able to be a Jew. You've given up your Judaism. The only people that could be Jews are people that either don't believe in God or they go to synagogue. It's okay if you're an atheist, but not a Christian. Whoa. I mean, they do carry guns over there, and he was a little upset. So we backed off. But he exploded. And so again, you have people, this whole concept of, well, we need to help the nation of Israel. You know what? I believe we need to stand by the nation of Israel. But we got to remember, when we come into the spiritual realm, they are enemies, as it says in Romans 11, concerning Christians to this day. And they do hate Christianity in their country. They will not encourage it. They'll do anything they can to get rid of it. So I believe the whole thing is going to change. Now, there has been a whole new study that shows, and I believe it's very clear, that 322 feet north of the Dome of the Rock, it's this giant bedrock, and they've actually built this dome, this little dome over it called the Dome of the Spirits. And this bedrock is something that, the bedrock is the lowest you can go, that has come up now to the top of this mountain. And many believe that is the actual place where Abraham offered Isaac on that bedrock. Also the place where David offered the sacrifice to stop the angel of death when they killed 70,000. But it's also the place where the Holy of Holies was, where the Ark of the Covenant sat. Now as you read Ezekiel, like I say, chapters 40 to 42, and Revelation 11, it says don't look at the outer court. And in Ezekiel it talks about a giant wall that's built between the holy and the profane. So I think it's very possible that they're going to put a wall up right next to the Dome of the Mocks, 100 feet, 150 feet in, and then they're going to build the temple there. Remember, the temple is a small building. It's probably about a third of the size of this gymnasium here. It's not a big building. The Holy of Holies was just an area about 15 by 15. The high priest went in once a year. Only the priests went in the temple. There's the court of the men, the court of the women, then the court of the Gentiles, which is a big area. But according to the prophecy, the court of the Gentiles is not going to be able to exist. So he's going to help them. He's going to make a covenant in that 7 years, and he's going to help them get in there and build the temple. But then it tells us here, at the last part of verse 27, that in the middle of that week, in the middle of that 7-year period, 3.5 years into it, he's going to stop the sacrifices. How? By making an abomination of desolation. We know from the scriptures, like we saw in Antiochus Epiphanes, as he took a pig and slaughtered it on the altar and set up the idol of Jupiter there in the temple. Well, he himself is the pig. He's going to come in the temple where only the priests are going to go. He's going to open the veil into the Holy of Holies where only the high priest is to go. And he's going to set himself on the mercy seat, proclaim himself to be God. It says in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, he'll proclaim himself above all that which is called God. Now, what do you have in the first 3.5 year period? You have the Jews hook, line, and sinker biting into this. You have the world biting into his one world economy where they have to take a mark in the back of the hand or their forehead. Once you take the mark, there's no hope for you. But you can't buy or sell without it. So it's going to be a very hard time if you don't go into a system. A one world military, a one world religion, and the one world economic system. And if you don't buy into all three aspects of the Antichrist, you're going to be horribly persecuted. But the Bible tells us that there's going to be 144,000 Jews, 12,000 from each tribe, that are going to be these radically anointed prophets who are going to be going throughout the world telling people exactly what you're learning this morning. And telling them that this isn't the Messiah, this is the Antichrist. He's a guy possessed by Satan, and they're going to say, how can such a man of peace, how can such a man with such wisdom be Satan? You're nuts. But they're going to be throughout the world. And on top of that, God's going to send down two witnesses from heaven, these radical men of God. Now, interesting enough, there's two guys in the Bible that haven't died. One is in the book of Genesis, a guy who the Bible tells us was a prophet. His name was Enoch. He walked with God, and he was not. Then the other guy was Elijah. Remember, he was caught up in the fiery chariot. Interesting enough, it says in Hebrews, it's appointed every man to die once. Those two guys haven't died. So it's very possible that them, and some believe it's Elijah and Moses, but either way, Elijah seems to be the one. They're going to come and they're going to have great power, and they're going to be speaking against the Antichrist, and they're going to bring havoc on the earth. Like Elijah, who stopped the rains and so forth. These guys are going to have great power, and the whole world who have bought into the Antichrist system are going to they're going to hate what these two prophets are going to do. Ultimately, they're going to have the power to kill them. And at their death, they start this worldwide, from that day forward, a feast, a holiday of the death of these two guys. And they just leave them dead in the streets. But on the third day, God raises them from the dead. And so they're going to have the 144,000, they're going to have the Bible, they're going to have those two witnesses. And the Jews are going to be shocked when the Antichrist does exactly what the Bible said he's going to do in that 3.5-year period. And at that point, they're going to believe in Jesus. And it says in Hebrews chapter 11, there, beginning of verse 26, and all Israel will be saved. At that point, Jews throughout the entire world are going to know that Jesus indeed is the Messiah, that everything these prophets said is true. And they're going to try now to flee to the rock city of Petra to be protected from the wrath of the Antichrist. And there's going to be a holocaust against the Jews like never before. But as we read the book of Revelation, in that second 3.5-year period, God now is going to begin pouring out His wrath. These bowls of wrath upon the planet, and the entire planet between the Antichrist and God's wrath, the world's going to be destroyed. It's going to end in a final battle called the Battle of Armageddon in the Jezreel Valley. Today, there's been more battles fought in that valley than any other spot on planet Earth. There's going to be a final worldwide battle right there. And then the earth is going to be, the Lord's going to renew the earth, and we are going to come back with Christ, and we're going to rule and reign in the second three things in that list in verse 24. He's going to bring an everlasting righteousness. All prophecies and visions are going to be fulfilled. And then He's going to anoint that most holy place, Jerusalem, a brand new Jerusalem where Christ Himself is going to rule and reign. For 1,000 years, we're going to reign with Him. A lot of radical stuff, isn't it? You guys, I can see all you guys. You got a vein right in the middle of your forehead bulging out. After you hear this stuff about 10 times, you finally start to get it. But it's so important that you are able to look and to see. People will say, well, you can tell me about the ancient prophecies of Babylon or Tyre and Sidon, but tell me what's getting ready to come in the future. Well, I can tell you. Look at Europe. It's going to go from 15 nations to 10 nations. Watch, there's going to be one guy in particular that's going to raise up out of that. Keep your eyes on that. You're going to see wars and rumors of wars continue. You're going to see earthquakes in diverse places. Famine is going to increase. The world's going to continue to grow more and more evil. The love of the man, just a natural love, a man for a wife or a man for a child, or the natural love that should be in the world because we're made in the image of God, is going to continue to diminish. There's going to be more and more hate, more and more self-seeking. Man's going to be seeking more after pleasure than anything else. We're going to see the whole world becoming more like Sodom and Gomorrah. We're going to see the whole world becoming more like the days of Noah. And we're in that. It's hard to imagine it can get any worse. But yet it's going to continue to accelerate in that day, in that way. Now Peter says, the one thing that's going to be hard for us believers is the Lord's merciful, not wishing any to perish. He's going to keep delaying it and delaying it and delaying it until some get sarcastic saying, oh, you've always said the Lord's going to come back. So here you are, 80 years old, saying, man, I've been hearing that since I was a little girl. You know what? God's merciful. And you're right. He should have already come back. He's in overtime right now. But that's the way he is. Remember, before the flood, he made Methuselah, and he said, in the day of his death comes destruction. What happened to Methuselah? He ended up becoming the oldest man that ever lived. 969 years. It got ridiculous because of God's mercies. In the same way, we're going to be going, how long has that fig tree been around? You know, isn't it about time for those figs? I mean, they're rotten by now. It's going to get delayed, but it's because of the mercies of God. How many of you have come to the Lord in the last 10 years? I mean, aren't you glad the Lord held out just another 10 years? Well, he's holding out for at least another 25 minutes or so. But that day and hour, he says, we're not going to know like the first coming of Christ. But we will know the season. And when you see the season, you better get ready. Are you ready for the coming of the Lord right now? I sure hope you are. Let's all bow our heads this morning.